In the winter of 1964, the old Capuchin monastery of San Giovanni Rotondo decided to unseal a room that had been closed for decades. The place had no official name in the archives, yet among the monks it was whispered as the Room of Shadows, a chamber where forgotten documents rested under layers of dust and time. When the door creaked open, a stale breath of cold stone drifted out, carrying the scent of parchment and old secrets. On the lowest shelf, wrapped in brittle linen and darkened by age, they discovered a leather-bound dossier marked with a fading sigil, C47, Occultis. The binding cracked as they lifted it. Inside the front cover, an old superior had written a warning in small, slanted script, "Not for public release, for the study of souls only." The air in the room shifted. The monks knew immediately what this meant. Someone, decades earlier, had tried not to preserve this document but to bury it. When they opened the first page, the handwriting was unmistakable. These were the personal notes of Padre Pio, written in 1918, in the years when the world was still bleeding from war, and when whispers of the supernatural seemed to drift closer to the surface of ordinary life. His opening line was simple, but it carried a strange weight. "This is the account of the woman they brought to me, the one they called Agata." But the next line, underlined twice, chilled the monks deeper than the cold stone around them, and of the shadow that walked behind her. According to the letter attached to the file, Sister Agata came from a small convent near Foggia. The sisters there described her as quiet, obedient, gentle, a woman whose frail health had followed her since childhood. Nothing about her suggested danger or mystery, but the final months before her arrival told a different story, one that none of the nuns could explain. She had begun forgetting prayers she had known since her novitiate days. She shrank from holy water, as though it scalded her. Some nights, the sisters found her awake, kneeling on the floor of her cell, drawing strange symbols in a dusting of black ash, though no lamp, fire, or candle had been lit. The Mother Superior's letter ended with a single sentence: "Father, we fear what follows her is not illness." When Padre Pio received the request, he agreed to see her. In the margins of the document, he later confessed that before she ever arrived, he felt her presence. "I sensed her," he wrote, as though some premonition clung to the air itself. On the morning of the 7th of September 1918, the convent sent her to San Giovanni Rotondo. Fog covered the hills like a shroud, and the courtyard stones were still wet from the night's rain. Agata approached the monastery, supported by two sisters, with a local priest following closely behind, his face hollow with exhaustion. Padre Pio stood at the doorway as they entered, and in his notes he described that first moment with a precision that suggested both awe and dread. "I saw her silhouette, and behind her, a presence that did not belong to this earth." He did not call it a figure or a creature. Instead, he spoke of it as a distortion, something that resembled the shape of a person but lacked any true form. It moved when she moved, breathed when she breathed, as though tethered to her by some invisible thread. When Agata was guided into the small parlor room, she refused to lift her head. Her veil trembled, her fingers curled into the fabric of her sleeves as if she were gripping something no one else could see. At last she looked up. Padre Pio wrote that her eyes were dark, not the dark of color, but of depth, like staring into a dried-out well where the bottom had long vanished. The two sisters stepped back instinctively. The priest behind them clutched his rosary so tightly the beads cracked between his fingers. Agata whispered only one sentence, her voice thin and shaking: "Father, you should not come near me." But when Padre Pio stepped closer, her lips curved into a smile that did not belong to fear. A soft laugh slipped from her. The sound was wrong, layered, as if 2 or 3 different throats produced it at once. From that moment, the room changed. Something unseen thickened the air, as if the walls themselves were listening. Agata's every movement seemed pulled by an invisible weight, and when her gaze drifted toward the crucifix on the wall, she recoiled as though struck by a burning iron. Padre Pio wrote that the trembling in her hands did not come from illness, nor did the quiet muttering that escaped her lips from time to time. She whispered fragments of familiar prayers, then slipped into words that belonged to no language the monks recognized. But the phrase she repeated the most, almost inaudibly, was, "It came because I called. I didn't know. I didn't know." At that early stage, Padre Pio could not yet understand what she meant. The meaning would reveal itself later, in a way he would never forget. He ended the first section of his testimony with a simple, devastating sentence, the line that stunned the monks who unsealed the document nearly half a century later. The battle for her soul began the moment she crossed our threshold. Long before her arrival at San Giovanni Rotondo, Sister Agata was known throughout her small convent near Foggia as the quiet one, the gentle one, the woman whose frail body seemed to belong to suffering as naturally as a candle belongs to flame. Her fellow sisters often said she had the soul of a child and the endurance of a saint, for she never complained about the aching joints, the fevers, or the nights she spent coughing alone in her cell. She was the type of nun who prayed not with her lips, but with the softness of her life. Everything about her story should have ended there, in anonymity and devotion. Yet fate had placed a shadow on her path, one that no one in the convent recognized until it was too late. The first sign was small. She stumbled during evening prayer and forgot the second half of the Hail Mary, a prayer she had recited since childhood. The sisters thought exhaustion was to blame. They told her to rest, to sleep longer, to drink warm broth. But the next day, she forgot more, and the day after that, even more. Soon she could not finish a single prayer without freezing midway, staring into the air as if someone were whispering a different set of words into her ear. Then came the fear. Agata had once worn a small wooden crucifix beneath her habit, and she used to kiss it before sleeping. But one afternoon, as she reached for it, she recoiled violently and dropped it on the floor. Her hand shook as though she had touched a hot iron. The sisters found her in tears, unable to explain the terror clawing at her chest. Later that night, when a young novice sprinkled holy water over the dinner table as she did every evening, Agata jerked backward, her chair scraping against the stones with a sharp cry. Her skin reddened where the water touched her. It was then that the Mother Superior realized something deeper, something darker was at work. After midnight, the sisters discovered another disturbing sign. Agata was awake again, kneeling on the cold floor of her cell. She did not seem to notice the lantern light that flickered at her doorway. Her fingers traced symbols on the ground, circles within circles, jagged arrows, marks that resembled runes but belonged to no language from any book in their library. What chilled the sisters most was not the symbols themselves, but the material she used, a thin dust of black ash. There was no candle, no lamp, no source of fire anywhere near her. One sister whispered that it smelled faintly like burnt herbs. Another said it smelled more like something older, something that had no business inside a convent. Within a week, the Mother Superior could no longer deny what was unfolding before her eyes. She wrote to Padre Pio, detailing everything that had happened with careful, trembling precision. At the end of the letter, she added only one line: "Father, we fear that what afflicts Agata is not of this world." Padre Pio agreed to see her immediately. The morning they brought Agata to the Capuchin monastery was thick with fog. The women who escorted her two sisters and a local priest appeared almost ghost-like as they approached the courtyard. Agata walked between them, her steps slow and uncertain, like someone moving through a dream she could not wake from. Her veil clung to her face, and her breathing came in shallow bursts. It was not sickness, it was dread. Inside the sealed file, found decades later, Padre Pio described that moment with a clarity that left little room for doubt. He had been standing at the arched entrance of the monastery when he first set eyes on her. She did not look up, but he wrote that he felt something brush the edge of his spirit, like a cold wind that carried no air. Then, when she lifted her head slightly, he saw it. "I sensed a darkness standing behind her," he wrote. "It was shaped like a person but without a face. It clung to her like a second shadow." The two nuns holding Agata's arms had grown pale. They had not slept. The priest who followed behind them, his rosary wrapped tightly in his fist, walked as though every step added years to his life. They guided Agata into a small receiving room just past the entrance, a room meant for quiet conversations and confessions. That morning, it felt more like a chamber awaiting a verdict. Agata sat on a wooden chair near the wall. Her veil fell slightly to the side, revealing cheeks sunk from weeks of fear. She seemed to shrink into herself, but her hands, trembling, constantly moved against her habit as though brushing away invisible insects. The sisters tried to speak to her, but she turned her face away from the crucifix hanging above the door. Padre Pio approached her gently, careful not to alarm her, but when he stepped within a few feet, Agata's breath hitched. She raised her head with slow, unnatural precision. Her eyes met his. He later wrote that her gaze was so dark it seemed bottomless, not merely black but empty, like staring into an unlit cavern where sound itself died. In that moment, the room felt colder. Even the lantern flame on the table flickered, bending as though pulled by an unseen breath. Agatha spoke for the first time since her arrival. Her voice was small but trembling, stretched tight like a string about to snap. "Father, you should not come near me." The sisters froze. The priest took a step back. Padre Pio, however, remained where he was. And then it happened. Agatha's lips parted. The expression on her face shifted not to fear, but to something disturbingly close to amusement. A low, layered laugh escaped her. It was not one voice but two or three intertwined, as though something inside her found humor in the moment. Her hands twitched. Her shoulders jerked. The atmosphere thickened again, the room swallowing sound like a closed tomb. Padre Pio wrote that he knew, even before she spoke again, that this was no ordinary affliction. She did not come alone, he wrote. Something had followed her, something that believed it had a claim on her soul. At that moment, the real mystery of Agatha began, and whatever walked behind her was only just beginning to reveal itself. The room where they brought Agatha was small, almost bare, with the faint scent of candle wax lingering in the corners. It was the kind of space meant for quiet confessions and simple conversations. But as soon as she crossed the threshold, the air thickened in a way no one could explain. Even the two nuns who had accompanied her found themselves stepping backward, as though some instinct warned them to keep distance. Padre Pio entered last. He closed the door gently behind him, and the muted click of the latch echoed far louder than it should have. For a moment, he simply stood there, watching Agatha. She sat hunched on a wooden chair, her hands shaking, her veil slightly askew from the long journey. She looked small, fragile, almost ghost-like. But there was something else, a heaviness, a tension, a feeling that the space around her was warped by something unseen. He took a step forward. The instant he moved, Agatha reacted. Her chin lifted with unsettling slowness, as if someone else were pulling invisible strings beneath her skin. Her face tilted upward until her gaze met his. Padre Pio later wrote that he had never seen eyes like hers that day. They were dark, not simply in color, but in depth. They looked as though they had swallowed light, as though they were not eyes at all, but openings into something bottomless. "When I stepped closer," he wrote, "she raised her head, and her eyes were black, deep as though without a flaw. The presence I saw in them was not human." The words captured only a fraction of what he felt. He would explain later that it was not merely the darkness in her gaze, it was the sensation that something behind those eyes was watching him, studying him, waiting for him to make the next move. Agatha did not blink. Her breathing grew slow and deliberate, as though she were adjusting to some rhythm that no one else could hear. Padre Pio called her name once, then twice. She did not respond. The nuns clasped their rosaries and whispered prayers under their breath. Then, at last, she spoke. The words were simple, ordinary, even, but the way they fell from her lips made the sisters shudder. "Father," she whispered, "you should not come near me." It was the only sentence she would speak for nearly an hour. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. There was a strange, restrained urgency to it, like someone trapped behind a wall, banging from the other side, trying to warn him. And yet the lips that spoke those words seemed unfamiliar, as though they were not entirely her own. Padre Pio stepped closer, despite the warning. Her eyes tracked the movement, but her body remained perfectly still, frozen in that unnatural rigidity. There was something.
The friary of San Giovanni Rotondo lay wrapped in a soft winter fog that December night. The lanterns along the old stone walls flickered like fragile stars, powerless against the darkness. Silence covered the monastery like a heavy veil, thick, sacred, absolute. It was nearly 2 in the morning when Padre Pio pushed open the wooden door of the chapel. His steps were slow that night, slower than usual. His wounds had bled more during the afternoon mass, and his body felt frail, carried only by obedience and love. But he was used to pain. What he was not used to was the strange heaviness in his spirit. There are nights, rare ones, when heaven presses close to earth. Padre Pio had learned to sense them. And on those nights, souls sometimes come. He reached the altar rail, knelt, and pressed his forehead against the wood. "Speak, Lord, your servant listens." The sanctuary lamp trembled. At first, he thought it was his own vision strained by exhaustion. But then he heard it, the soft, unmistakable sound of a child's footsteps. Not running, not playful, but measured, intentional, like someone walking toward a purpose. Padre Pio lifted his head. A small boy stood in the aisle between the pews, barefoot, thin, wrapped in a faint blue glow that was not of this earth. He looked no older than 6. The boy smiled gently. "Padre," he said, "may I come closer?" The friar's breath caught, not from fear, but from overwhelming tenderness. Souls of children were the purest lights he ever encountered. "Yes, little one," Padre Pio said, "come." The child walked forward, each step soundless, as though his feet did not touch the ground at all. His hands were folded like he was in perpetual prayer. Padre Pio asked softly, "Who are you?" "My name is Lucio. I lived in Pietrelcina. I died 2 months ago." Padre Pio lowered his head. He had indeed heard of a sick child named Lucio. The town had mourned his loss briefly, but children in Italy died often during those years. The news had blended into many others. Lucio continued, "I came because the Madonna asked me to. She said you would listen." The air in the chapel tightened, as though the walls themselves leaned in. Padre Pio whispered, "What does she want you to tell me, child?" The boy looked upward, as if seeing something invisible. His lips trembled before he spoke. "She said, the earth will enter a year of great trembling, the year 2026. Padre Pio nearly stopped breathing. "That is long after my time," he murmured. The boy nodded. "Yes, but she said you must write it in the records of the friary, so the world will believe when the time comes." He walked closer until he stood only inches from the friar. Padre Pio could feel warmth radiating from him, not heat, but something gentler, like the warmth of grace. "Padre," the boy whispered, his eyes filling with a strange, holy sorrow, "she showed me what will happen."
Lucio lifted his small hand, and the chapel darkened. It wasn't that the light vanished, rather a deeper light replaced it, the kind that only comes from visions given by heaven. Padre Pio felt the same sensation he felt during bilocations, a soft tearing, like the world opening. Lucio spoke again. "The Madonna showed me the earth, but it was not the earth we see now. The space before them shimmered. A landscape appeared, vast, wounded, trembling. I saw storms, Padre, storms that swallowed cities." Padre Pio watched as the vision unfolded, oceans rising like living giants, swallowing coastlines, winds howling like armies let loose, skies split with fire. Lucio's voice shook. "She said the seas will rise more than any time since Noah. In 2026, the waters will break their boundaries." The scene shifted. Padre Pio saw people running, carrying children, shouting prayers into drowning winds. The boy continued, "I saw sickness too, diseases that came not only from nature, but from the pride of men. They will spread faster than fire. I saw doctors fall to their knees because they could not understand." Padre Pio closed his eyes. "Why is this allowed, child?" Lucio's face softened. She said because mankind no longer listens, and when love is ignored, warnings must speak. The vision changed again. This time Padre Pio saw land cracking open, mountains shaking, and rivers turning dark with mud. I saw floods, Padre, not like the floods of old villages, but floods that move with the strength of oceans. His small hands trembled, and the Madonna cried. She said the earth is tired, tired of being wounded. The vision faded. Darkness returned. Silence resumed. The sanctuary lamp flickered back to life, as if waking from sleep. Padre Pio reached out, gently touching the child's shoulder, but his hand passed through like touching soft wind. He whispered, "Little Lucio, do not fear. You are with God." The boy looked into his eyes. "Padre, there is more."
Lucio stepped back, as if preparing to deliver a message heavier than his small body could bear. She said humanity will face 3 trials in 2026: water, sickness, and division. Padre Pio frowned. Division? Lucio nodded. I saw people fighting each other, not only countries, but families, friends, even believers. I saw truth twisted until no one remembered what was real. I saw lies spreading like smoke. The child swallowed hard, as though remembering a painful image. Padre, she said darkness will rise not from the sky, but from human hearts. Padre Pio sighed with sorrow. Yes, I have seen that darkness already. Lucio continued. She said there are 2 ways the world can pass through 2026. With repentance, and the year will be painful but brief. Without repentance, and the year will become a doorway to greater suffering. Padre Pio felt a weight on his chest, like invisible stone pressing down. What must be done? He asked. Lucio answered with the simplicity of a child, yet the authority of heaven. Pray, warn, and write. Padre Pio blinked. Write? Yes, the child said. She said, you must write everything I tell you into the archives of the friary, so that one day when the world trembles, the faithful will know heaven tried to warn them. The friar hesitated. But if I write these things, the brothers may think I am imagining, or worse, that I am mad. Lucio smiled gently. Padre, she said they already think you are strange. Padre Pio couldn't help but smile. That is true. Then one more strange thing will not hurt, Lucio whispered.
Lucio's glow brightened, filling the pews with a soft blue radiance. He raised his hand again, and another vision appeared. But this time it was not destruction. It was her, the Madonna, radiant, mourning, yet full of impossible tenderness. She held a globe in her hands, small, fragile, shimmering like crystal. A single tear fell from her cheek and touched the globe. Where the tear fell, mountains shook. Where it rolled, rivers overflowed. Lucio whispered, she cries not because she punishes, but because she loves. Padre Pio's throat tightened. What did she say in this vision, child? Lucio closed his eyes, and his voice became soft, almost melodic. She said, the world asks for signs, yet rejects the ones already given. They ask for miracles, yet trample on grace. They ask for peace, yet sow war in their own homes. The child opened his eyes. She said the year 2026 will be a great mirror, Padre. A mirror? Yes, a mirror of human hearts. If the heart is full of pride, that year will break it. If the heart is full of fear, that year will crush it. But if the heart is full of love, that year will purify it. Padre Pio whispered, "And what of the faithful?" Lucio smiled. "She will protect them, not from all pain, but from despair. Those who call on her will not be abandoned." The vision faded. Only Lucio remained, glowing softly like a candle's soul.
The chapel had settled into an otherworldly stillness, the kind that only appears when the veil between earth and eternity thins to a fragile thread. The faint blue light around Lucio flickered like a candle fighting against an unseen wind. Padre Pio could hear nothing. No rustle of cassocks from the hallway, no sighing of the monastery walls, only the small, trembling breaths of the child standing before him. And then, without warning, Lucio's expression changed. The solemn radiance, the prophetic gravity that had surrounded him since his appearance, softened. It melted away like morning fog lifting from a quiet field. In its place remained only the fragile, unmistakable innocence of a child. A child who once ran across dusty Pietrelcina streets barefoot. A child who once clung to his mother's apron strings. A child who once prayed with a simple faith that adults spend their whole lives trying to regain. Lucio's lower lip quivered slightly. His voice, when it came, was smaller than before, less like an angelic messenger, more like a little boy on the edge of tears. "Padre, may I ask you something?" The friar's heart broke a little at the tremble in the child's tone. "Of course, my little one. Ask anything you wish." Lucio looked down at his own hands, translucent, glowing faintly, then slowly raised them as if they weighed more than he could bear. May you hold my hand?" The words struck Padre Pio like a blade of pure tenderness. He'd heard confessions of hardened men, of murderers, sinners, soldiers whose souls carried the weight of entire wars. He had witnessed apparitions, bilocated across continents, battled demons that clawed at his room at night. But nothing prepared him for the ache that filled his chest when a dead child asked to hold his hand. Instinctively, Padre Pio extended his palm. He expected nothing. Ghosts, even the holy ones, did not obey the laws of the physical world. His hand would pass through the child, like through cool air. But instead, Lucio placed his small hand into the friar's palm, and Padre Pio felt something. Not flesh, not bone, but warmth. A soft, pulsing warmth, like a heartbeat made of light. The friar inhaled sharply. "My child," he breathed, "how can this be?" Lucio's eyes shimmered as he answered. "It's cold where I come from," he said softly. "Not because heaven is cold, but because I miss my mother." A tear slipped down Padre Pio's cheek before he could stop it. "You loved her very much." Lucio nodded, his small face trembling. "She prayed for me every night." He paused, the memory washing over him like a gentle wave. "She used to sit beside my bed and tell me the stories of the Madonna every evening. Even when I was too sick to speak, she whispered them into my ear." Padre Pio swallowed the tightness in his throat. "And when I died," Lucio continued, "she asked the Madonna to keep me close, and she did." The child looked up, meeting Padre Pio's gaze with eyes too wise and too wounded for a boy his age. "And now she sends me to you." A quiet sob caught in the friar's throat. He pulled the child's hand closer to his chest, as if to shield him with the warmth of his mortal heart. "Lucio," he whispered, "do you fear returning to heaven?" The boy shook his head gently. "No, heaven is beautiful." He hesitated. "But I fear leaving this moment." Padre Pio brushed another tear away. "Why, little one?" Lucio smiled, almost an embarrassed smile, like a child admitting a secret. "Because I feel alive again when I speak to you." The friar closed his eyes. This was the kind of pain that did not pierce. It enveloped, reshaping the soul in silence. "Lucio," he said softly, "you are alive, just not as we are. Your life now rests inside God. You shine because He holds you." The boy listened, letting the words settle like warm blankets over his small shoulders. He nodded slowly. "Padre," he whispered after a long pause, "she said I must tell you one last thing." The friar opened his eyes. "Yes, child?" Lucio's voice grew more solemn again, but the innocence remained trembling beneath it. "She said you will not live to see the things I showed you, the storms, the sickness, the floods. You will already be home." Padre Pio lowered his head. He had always known his life would be one of suffering, but hearing that he would be spared the future cataclysms stirred mixed emotions.
Lucio continued, his tone softening. "But she also said, you will pray for that year from heaven, and your prayers will protect many souls." The friar nodded, as tears fell freely now. "And what of the world, child? Will it survive?" Lucio's eyes shifted, distant, as though listening to a voice no human ear could hear. His glowing hand tightened slightly around Padre Pio's fingers. "Yes," he said softly, "but changed." "Changed how?" The child did not look at him. His gaze drifted toward the crucifix, toward the flickering sanctuary lamp that seemed suddenly too small for the vast prophecy hanging in the air. "It will not be the same world you know. It will be a world more fragile, but more awake. A world where suffering will force people to choose, truly choose, between love and fear." He paused, drawing in a breath he did not need. "She said, some hearts will grow colder, harder, like stone left out in winter." A second pause. "But others will burn brighter than ever, brighter than fire, because they will finally understand they need God." Padre Pio felt something shift inside him, a mixture of dread, awe, and a fierce hope that could only be born from heaven. Lucio finally turned back to him. The light around him began to thin, dissolving like mist under dawn. "Padre," he whispered, "I'm being called." "No," Padre Pio whispered, his voice cracking. "One more moment, just one more." Lucio smiled through tears. "Moments don't exist for us anymore. Only love does." The chapel brightened, the child's glow rising toward a gentle brilliance. "Remember me, Padre." "I will," the friar whispered. "And write everything. She said the world will need these words." Then the light swelled, soft, warm, holy, until Lucio's small figure dissolved into it entirely. And once again, Padre Pio stood alone in the chapel. But the warmth remained on his palm, a small, impossible warmth, like the heartbeat of a soul returned briefly to earth.
The glow around Lucio thinned slowly, like morning fog pulling away from a quiet valley. It was not abrupt. Heaven does not depart violently. It withdraws the way a mother leaves a sleeping child, softly, gently, with a silence that still remembers touch. Lucio looked almost transparent now, as if made of trembling light. "Padre," he said, his voice no longer prophetic, but small and boyish, "I must go." Padre Pio rose to his feet, every ache in his damaged body, his torn hands, his fevered head, the deep pains that came from long nights of spiritual battle, vanished as if infancy were returned to him. He stood not as an old friar, not as a stigmatist worn by years of suffering, but simply as a father watching his child depart for a distant shore. "Tell the Madonna I am her servant," he whispered, "always." Lucio smiled, a soft, luminous curve of pure innocence. "She knows." "And the message?" Padre Pio steadied his voice. "I will write it." The child's face brightened, almost glowing again with relief. "That is why she sent me, Padre, so the world would not face these days without being warned or loved." For a moment, the chapel was filled with a hush that felt alive, almost breathing. The wooden pews, the stone floor, even the brass sanctuary lamp seemed to lean inward, as if they too wished to hold the child's presence a moment longer. Then the final shimmer. A thin, trembling veil of radiance flickered around Lucio, growing brighter, then softer, then bright again, like a heartbeat of light. And then he was gone. The air where he had stood pulsed once, warm as a hand pressed to the chest. The sanctuary lamp steadied, its flame no longer swaying as if in greeting. The faint glow that had clung to the chapel walls dissolved into the stones. Silence returned, not the empty silence of an abandoned church, but the holy silence that lingers after angels withdraw.
Padre Pio exhaled slowly. It felt like letting go of a miracle, but his mission remained. He walked across the chapel toward the small wooden desk tucked beneath the window. The dawn had not yet broken, but a faint line of gray light was beginning to gather at the horizon, barely visible through the thick monastery walls. The friar sat. His hands trembled, not from fear, nor from the wounds that still marked his palms, but from the weight of what he had witnessed. He reached for the pen. It was the same one he used each night to record confessions, graces, and unusual events within the monastery. Those records were not meant for outsiders. They were logs kept by the friars for the sake of order and obedience, meant to remain hidden within the walls of San Giovanni Rotondo. Tonight, however, this entry would not be ordinary. Padre Pio dipped the pen into ink, opened the large leather-bound volume reserved for internal events of spiritual significance, and began to write. His handwriting was slow and deliberate, each stroke careful, as though he feared the truth might break if written too quickly. He wrote, "On this night, the child Lucio, deceased of Pietrelcina, appeared by the permission of the Blessed Virgin Mary and delivered a message regarding future trials destined for the earth in the year of our Lord 2026. The friar paused, letting the ink dry. Then he continued.
He wrote the visions as the boy described them, the storms that stretched across continents, the sickness that dimmed the breath of thousands, the flood swallowing towns like open graves, the unrest of nations, the fire beneath the earth, and the trembling in the hearts of men. He wrote of the hope interwoven through the warnings, the souls who would awaken, the people who would turn back to God, the lights rising in the darkness like stars struggling against a storm-wrecked sky. He wrote the child's longing, his innocence, his coldness for missing his mother, his fragile request to hold a hand once more. He wrote the warmth he felt, a warmth no dead child should have been able to give. He wrote the final message that Padre Pio would not live to see the trials, but would pray for that year from heaven, protecting souls through intercession. He wrote until dawn. When the sunlight finally slipped through the window, spilling across the wooden desk in a band of gold, Padre Pio set the pen down. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but his soul felt strangely light, as if the act of writing had somehow lifted part of the prophecy into God's hands. He closed the heavy book with reverence and placed his wounded hand upon it. "Let this stand," he whispered, "for the generations who will need these words, for those who will fear the darkness, for those who must remember that heaven warns only because heaven loves." He pressed his palm more firmly against the cover. "And Mother, I have done as you asked." A breeze, not from any open window, drifted softly across the chapel. It carried the faint scent of roses. Padre Pio bowed his head. The Madonna had heard.
Many years later, long after Padre Pio had breathed his last breath, long after Lucio's mother had joined her son in the realm of light, the brothers of the friary uncovered the entry. It was buried deep in the archives, between records of small miracles and notes of strange phenomena the friars had documented over decades. Some doubted it. Some whispered that perhaps Padre Pio had recorded a dream. Others wondered if the entry was written by another hand trying to imitate him. But there were also those, especially the older friars, the ones who had known him, who believed instantly, without hesitation. They knew his handwriting. They knew his obedience. They knew his visions were never ordinary. All trembled while reading. The air around them seemed to shift, as though the child's presence lingered still in the ink, in the parchment, in the margins of the worn leather cover. As the year 2026 approached, the record did not remain hidden. Copies were made quietly, passed among trusted clergy. The Vatican archivist labeled it carefully, noting only potential vision concerning future trials. Source: San Giovanni Rotondo. But among the friars, the entry gained another name: the Chronicle of the Child of Light. A testimony, a warning, a memory preserved not to frighten but to prepare. A reminder that heaven speaks, not to destroy, but to guide, not to terrify, but to protect, not to punish, but to love. For love always warns before it wounds.
Years passed, decades followed, and like all secrets heaven plants into human hands, the chronicle slept, quietly, patiently, waiting for the hour it would be needed. Some said it was only a story. Some said it was the imagination of a mystic. But those who read it, those who felt the strange tremor in their chest as their eyes crossed Padre Pio's final line, knew better. Because the chronicle was not a prophecy of doom. It was a prophecy of choice. A reminder that heaven does not simply warn us of what is coming. Heaven reveals who we must become. And perhaps that is why you're hearing this now. Not by accident, not by coincidence, but because the world you are stepping into needs light bearers, souls who dare to look at the unseen, who dare to listen when heaven whispers. If this story stirred something inside you, a question, a fear, a spark,
Then stay close. There are more chapters hidden in forgotten archives, more visions sealed in dusty convents, more mysteries that were never meant to die in silence. And if you want to walk deeper into these sacred shadows with me, if you want more forgotten chronicles, more miracles, more mysteries the world was never meant to erase, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell, and join me every week as we reopen the pages heaven wrote for those who dare to see. Because this is only the beginning, and you were never meant to walk the rest of this story alone.